Moscow woke up sullen, and I was already on my feet before the city had time to lose its sleep. A habit, not to wait for an order, but to anticipate it. The envelope on the table lay as if the very air around it was tense. The seal of Department Number 2. The paper slightly rough, inside, a name, an address, a sequence of actions. Observe. Do not make contact. Report by the end of the day. Work alone. Added by hand, like a sentence or a warning. I understood immediately. They were putting me before a choice that only the one holding the map knows. I step outside, and the city looks at me like at a stage already played through. People, trams, signs, and I, a shadow among shadows. Distance, reflections in shop windows, the twilight light. All of it for me is like route markings. I saw Professor Melnikov on the same street, identified by his handwriting, his glasses, his briefcase, his step, mechanically habitual, but today his eyes wandered, as if fear had settled inside them. The scholar's carelessness hid the trembling of his fingers. He was walking to the library, and this path seemed to him the only chain among an abyss of possibilities. Two followed him, a woman in a gray coat, carrying a posture too crisp for Moscow, and a man in glasses, a suit too straight, a shirt too white. Westerners, judging by their manner of speech and the soft rustle of their steps. They weren't simply watching the professor. Their eyes kept flicking, with troubling frequency, to where I was supposed to be. And that meant someone had given them the map before mine. Someone inside. Someone with a stamp and access to my directives. I never intervene until I've gathered the picture, but I felt inside how the thin web was tightening into a knot. A staged meeting, a naive scholar, Westerners as directors of the act, and someone's finger on the button issuing the command. In the library, the smell of old pages mixed with the lacquer of an expensive suit. And when I entered, the scene was already set. A table in the center, on it, a small suitcase with Soviet markings, and next to it, a tiny Western device resembling a signal jammer, and a paper with a crooked note. Check whom you trust. They spoke in a mix of languages, English, smooth, almost businesslike, Russian, cautious. One of the Westerners, with a faint smirk, addressed me in English, as if inviting me to an interview. "We expected you. This will be quick. We only negotiate options." His tone was soft, but the words meant a threat. They hadn't come to recruit the professor. The professor was a screen. They had come to test me, to see how I would act without connection and without the center's support. I saw their calculation. Cut me off using the jammer, put me before the wreck of our suitcase, a fake bomb, and force me to make a choice that would compromise either me or the system, or both. I approached the table, my movements calm, because panic is a luxury for amateurs. Their eyes slid over my figure. They saw not just a person, but a mirror reflecting countless possible outcomes. The professor, trembling, whispered, "They started 3 weeks ago. Said you would return." His words stuttered like stepping stones over a river that cannot be crossed without risk. "Who started?" I asked evenly. No answer came. One of the men in glasses, lightly rubbing his fingers, said in Russian with a slight accent, "We don't intend to interfere in your internal affairs. We are a tool. But a tool can also cut. We offer a safe exit for you and the professor in exchange for cooperation." His smile was a blade, because cooperation for them never means friendship, and for us, it doesn't always mean betrayal, more often, a test. He showed a folder with forged documents labeled contacts, payments, place a dead drop, all of it. The perfect excuse for someone from my side to consider me compromised and remove me. Then I noticed how the woman in the gray coat was paying attention not to any of us, but to an old chipped outlet in the corner, as if measuring not electricity, but a time machine. Control. She quietly observed the distance between the wires, as if looking for a hidden sensor. This was not mere observation, it was scenario modeling. How we would act when contacts are severed, when the center is blind, when all we have in front of us is this table and a choice. I took the suitcase in my hands to show that I knew what it was, and inside I found not only a triggering mechanism, but also a notebook with codes and dates, all carefully prepared to confirm guilt. Fine work for a setup. But under that layered falseness, there was another note, a cipher readable only by someone who knew the old method. The first letter of each line formed a word from my own jargon. This was not Western work. This was a message from my people. Someone in the department had activated an ancient code to say, "We are testing you as you test them." And now my choice had to be public. I used a small trick, made them think I was cut off, alone, while I, pressing my palm to a hidden clasp on my glove, sent a signal, not on air, but into memory, a tiny marker I always carried, readable, if needed, only by my mentor. A step as thin as possible, countering their certainty. The man in glasses noticed it, which meant either he had excellent vision or he wanted me to notice that he had noticed. And at that moment, everything became clearer. They hadn't come just for the professor. They had come to show they could present a spy in a light beneficial to them and force the department to eliminate him internally. A house cleaning, as one of them said. And the hand holding the stamp of Department Number 2 was either complicit in this or an enemy testing their own with fire. The conversation shifted into movement. One of the Westerners stood up, approached me closely, smelled of leather and cheap cologne, and spoke a phrase that seemed to have several layers. "You are a bridge, comrade. A bridge that can be destroyed or preserved. Choose." His words were like a hammer hitting glass, not shattering it, but making you believe it could fall at any second. I pretended to hesitate, part of the maneuver, because a spy is not the one who rushes into action without thinking. He is the one who calculates who benefits from his fall. The timer on the suitcase blinked, the digits showed seconds, and at that same instant a thick, abrupt sound came from outside the library. Not an explosion, but a signal, as if someone marked a stage. Panic could have begun, but events froze, because everyone in that room knew the cost of haste. I pressed my finger against a small inscription under the suitcase lid and saw letters that did not match what the Westerners saw. Phase 1. Check. I understood. This wasn't an attempt to destroy anything. It was a multi-layered operation. Someone had launched a chain of events in which I was meant to play a role, but it was unclear whose will was behind it. The professor sobbed, and in his eyes flickered hatred toward those who dragged him into the game and fear of those who used him. Then came footsteps, not theirs, not mine. Footsteps resonating differently along the library walls, as if someone else had decided to attend the test. The door opened slightly, and in the doorway appeared the silhouette of my curator. The familiar gait, the old raincoat, the gaze that could have been salvation or a sentence. He did not rush. He entered slowly, like a man who had assessed the scene in seconds and said, "Report." His voice did not tremble, but it carried enough meaning to hold two messages. You are one of us, and you are under question. I stood between them, between strangers trying to trap me, and my own, who might have ordered the trap. The professor buried his face in his hands. The Westerners smiled like scientists who had gotten the result of an experiment. The curator slowly looked at the suitcase and at me, and quietly said, "Are the games over?" And in that moment, the timer on the suitcase jerked, its digits flickered, and on the panel appeared an inscription absent from any instructions. Phase 2, the ellipsis like a mockery. No one breathed. I felt the cold tighten around my shoulders and understood. It no longer mattered who would win in the next half hour. What mattered was who would write the report and what version would remain. I instinctively pressed my palm to the coat, where a tiny metal object lay. Not a key, not a bullet, but a sign that I could disappear if needed. I could turn in the professor. I could take him into the shadows. I could turn myself in. The choice was too heavy to be made in a second, yet too instant to be delayed. I stepped back to conceal my intent, and at that moment a click sounded. Quiet, like a book being closed. In my ears the words, "Check whom you trust," began to swirl, now sounding like a sentence or a promise. How many phases were left? Who was counting? Who pressed the buttons? I inhaled, the air heavy. I felt the eyes of everyone on me, foreign, familiar, invisible. Anything could have happened next. I could cut the red wire and one outcome would follow. I could pretend to act and another outcome would come. I could take the professor and leave, taking a living piece of evidence, and then a bigger game would begin. But the story you are reading stops at the very moment I lifted the cutters to the wire, because what follows no longer fits into explanation. A click, a step, a whisper, and the world shrinks to the size of the gap in a wire. The timer blinked one final time, showed not a number, but a word, foreign to us. Begin. And all I could hear were footsteps in the distance and the sound of my own thoughts demanding an answer for which I had neither time nor right. I did not cut, and I did not retreat. I only felt the floor thin beneath my feet, and at that very second the door opened, and in the doorway stood a man with a faceless smile, and he said a phrase I did not fully understand, or perhaps understood too late. And so the only thing left to say is this: I made a choice, but what it was, whom it served, and what tomorrow will bring, remains a secret.